It's hard to even know where to start with this, but I guess the beginning is as good a place as any. Lisa and I were married for 9 years. We had 3 kids together, and while our marriage wasn't perfect, I thought we were doing okay. I thought we were partners. But looking back, maybe I should have seen the cracks forming long before everything fell apart. It all started with a conversation Lisa casually dropped on me one evening. I was on the couch scrolling through my phone while the kids played in the next room. Lisa sat down next to me and said, "Hey, so I've been thinking about doing something really meaningful for Emily and Paul." Emily, her sister, and Paul, her brother-in-law, had been struggling with infertility for years. I knew that. Lisa had mentioned it in passing a few times. "That's nice," I said, not really paying attention. I figured she meant cooking them dinner or offering to babysit their dog. "No, I mean something bigger," she continued, her tone too light to match the weight of what she was about to say. "I'm going to carry their baby. You know, be their surrogate." I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I laughed nervously and said, "You're joking, right?" "No," she said, frowning like I was the one being unreasonable. "Why would I joke about something like that? Emily and Paul need help, and I can help them." I sat up straight, my phone forgotten. "Lisa, are you serious? This is huge. How long have you been thinking about this?" "For a while," she said, shrugging like we were talking about which restaurant to order takeout from. "It just makes sense. Emily's my sister, we're close, and I can do this for her." Something about the way she said it made my stomach sink. "You've already decided, haven't you?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "It's my body, my choice," she said, as if she'd rehearsed it. "And this is something I want to do. I know you might not get it right away, but I thought you'd at least support me." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just the surrogacy itself. It was the fact that she'd made this decision without me. She decided something that would affect both of our lives, our marriage, our family, and she hadn't even thought to bring me into the conversation until it was already a done deal. "Lisa," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm even though my head was spinning, "this isn't just about your body. This is about our family. Did it even cross your mind to talk to me before agreeing to this?" She rolled her eyes. "Of course, I thought about it. But I knew how you'd react. You'd make it about you when it's not." "Not about me?" I repeated, incredulous. "Lisa, you're talking about carrying someone else's baby. How could it not be about me? About us?" Her expression hardened. "This is my decision. You can either support me, or, I don't know, do whatever you feel like you need to do." There it was. The ultimatum. She didn't say the word divorce, but I could hear it in her tone, hanging unspoken between us. I stood up, needing some space to think, to breathe. "If you go through with this," I said, my voice low, "I don't know how we come back from it." Her response was as cold as it was immediate. "Then I guess you need to figure that out." For the next few weeks, things between us were strained, to say the least. Lisa threw herself into the surrogacy plans, spending hours on the phone with Emily and Paul, going to doctor appointments, and acting like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I was left feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. Every time I tried to bring it up, she shut me down with the same line. "This is my body, my choice." It didn't matter how much it hurt me or how much it would affect our family. She'd already made up her mind. When she announced she was officially pregnant, I barely reacted. "Okay," I said, then walked out of the room. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. I thought that would be the wake-up call she needed, but it wasn't. If anything, she doubled down. "You're seriously going to leave me over this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief when I handed her the papers. "You're abandoning me when I'm doing something selfless and beautiful?" "I told you this would happen," I said, barely able to look at her. "You chose this, not me." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't cry or yell. Instead, she just shook her head like I was the one who'd let her down. "Fine," she said quietly, "if that's how you want it." For the next few days, I tried to focus on the kids and keep things as normal as possible, but it wasn't easy. Lisa was still living in the house, and the tension was suffocating. Every interaction felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. I kept hoping she'd wake up and realize what this was doing to our family, but instead, She acted like I was the one being unreasonable. Looking back, I think that was the moment I realized just how far apart we drifted. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I'd ever really known her at all. The tension in the house grew unbearable after I filed for divorce. Lisa stayed, saying it was for the kids, but we both knew the real reason. She had nowhere else to go. Moving out while pregnant wasn't exactly easy, and with her time consumed by doctor appointments and planning with Emily and Paul, she hadn't even bothered looking for a new place. It felt like I was living with a stranger, someone who didn't care that she had blown up our life for her sister's dream. At first, Lisa acted like nothing had changed. She still cooked dinner for the kids, still sat at the table for family meals, and even tried to make small talk with me, as if pretending hard enough would make things go back to normal. I wasn't playing along. I kept my answers short and my distance clear. She wasn't my partner anymore, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. Then came the requests. Small at first, like asking me to pick up groceries or grab something from the pharmacy on my way home from work. "Since you're already out," she'd say, smiling like this was a normal favor between a husband and wife. I refused every time. "Ask Emily or Paul," I'd say. "This isn't my responsibility." She'd sigh dramatically or roll her eyes but wouldn't push it. At least, not at first. As the pregnancy progressed, the requests got bigger. She wanted help setting up a crib for the baby, asked me to drive her to a doctor's appointment when Paul couldn't make it, even hinted that I should be there for the ultrasound. "It's not about the baby," she said one night when I flat out refused. "It's about supporting me. You're still my husband." I couldn't believe her audacity. "I'm not your husband," I snapped. "Not anymore. You made sure of that when you went behind my back with this." She looked like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. "Call Paul," I said. "He's the one who should be supporting you." From then on, the dynamic in the house shifted again. Lisa stopped pretending things were fine and started trying to guilt me into helping. She'd sit on the couch with her hand on her belly, sighing loudly and saying things like, "I don't know how I'm going to do this on my own," or, "I thought you'd at least care enough to help a little." I ignored her every time. She'd made her choice, and I wasn't about to let her drag me into the consequences. One night, though, she went further than usual. I was in my room, trying to focus on some work, when she knocked on the door. When I opened it, she was standing there, holding her back like she was in pain. "I need you to run to the store," she said. "I'm craving pickles and we're out." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes, I'm serious," she said, her voice growing sharper. "I'm pregnant, in case you forgot, and it's not like I can just run out and get it myself." "That's not my problem," I said, stepping back to close the door. "Ask Paul." The door slammed in her face, and I could hear her muttering angrily as she walked away. The next morning, she didn't speak to me at all. It was just as well. The kids started noticing the tension, though I did my best to shield them from it. One day, my oldest asked me, "Why is Mom so sad all the time?" I didn't know how to answer. "She's just going through a hard time," I said. "But it's not your job to worry about that. You just focus on being a kid." Lisa, meanwhile, leaned harder and harder on me, even as I made it clear I wasn't going to budge. One night, she tried to pull the kids into it. She was helping them with their homework and said, loud enough for me to hear, "I wish your dad would be more helpful. It's so hard doing everything by myself." I walked into the room and stared her down. "Don't do that," I said, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't get scared. "Don't drag them into this." "Why not?" she snapped. "It's the truth, isn't it? You've checked out. You don't care about me or this family anymore." I clenched my jaw, willing myself not to yell. "You don't get to play the victim, Lisa. You made your choice, and now you're dealing with the fallout. Don't try to put that on me, and don't bring the kids into it." She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes was pure venom. I walked away before things escalated further. The breaking point came about 2 weeks later. Lisa was sitting on the couch, rubbing her belly and sighing loudly, as she often did. Finally, she said, "I thought you'd be better than this. I thought you'd at least care enough to support me, even if you were mad." I put down the book I was reading and looked at her. "Lisa, what did you think was going to happen?" That I'd just roll over and be okay with you carrying someone else's kid? That I'd be fine with you deciding something that affects all of us without even asking me? I thought you'd understand, she said, her voice cracking. I thought you'd realize this isn't about you. Well, now you know, I said. I don't understand, and I'm never going to. You chose this, Lisa. You made this decision. Not me. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Call Emily, I said, standing up and heading to my room. Call Paul. This isn't my problem. When I closed the door behind me, I could still hear her crying on the couch. But this time, I didn't feel any guilt. Just exhaustion. Lisa finally moved out a few weeks after that night. She packed up a few bags, strapped the baby car seat into her mom's car, and left without much ceremony. I'm doing what you wanted, she said bitterly as she walked out the door. Don't expect me to thank you for making my life harder. I didn't respond. I just stood there with my arms crossed, watching her go. It was strange. Part of me felt relieved, like I could finally start to rebuild without her chaos hanging over my head. But another part of me felt empty, not because I wanted her back, but because of everything we'd lost. The house was quieter without her, which was both a blessing and a curse. The kids missed her, even though they didn't quite understand what was going on. They asked about her constantly. When's Mom coming back? Why isn't she living with us? I stuck to simple answers. She's staying with Grandma for now, or Mom and I are figuring some things out. But I could see the confusion in their eyes. They knew something wasn't right, even if they couldn't put it into words. Lisa's absence didn't mean she was out of my life, though. The calls started almost immediately. First from her mom, then from Lisa herself. At first, they were about the kids. She wanted to set up a visitation schedule, which I agreed to because, despite everything, I didn't want to keep the kids from her. But soon enough, the calls shifted focus. Lisa started venting about how hard things were for her. The baby won't sleep, she complained. I haven't had more than 3 hours of rest in days. Do you know how hard this is? I'd bite my tongue to keep from snapping back. What was I supposed to say? That I felt sorry for her? That I'd swoop in and make everything better? I'd remind her, calmly but firmly, that this was her choice, and she needed to lean on Emily and Paul for support. She'd usually hang up after that, muttering something under her breath. Then one day, Paul showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days, and he was holding a box of diapers in one hand like he wasn't sure what to do with it. Can we talk? He asked, his voice hesitant. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. About what? Lisa, he said, and the baby, and everything, I guess. I sighed and stepped aside to let him in, more out of curiosity than anything else. He sat awkwardly on the edge of the couch, tapping his fingers against the diaper box. Look, he started. I know this whole situation has been complicated, but Lisa's really struggling. She's overwhelmed, and she doesn't have a lot of support. I raised an eyebrow. She has you and Emily. That's what this was all about, wasn't it? Supporting each other as a family? Paul looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. It's not that simple. Emily's still recovering, and I've been working a lot. We're doing the best we can, but Lisa needs more help. Let me stop you right there, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. This is your baby. Yours and Emily's. Lisa chose to carry it for you, and I told all of you from the start that I wouldn't be involved. If she's struggling, that's on you, not me. He looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. After a long silence, he finally muttered, I just thought you'd want to help, for Lisa's sake. For Lisa's sake? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Paul, let me be clear. I want no part of this. Lisa made her decision, and now she has to live with it. So do you. He left not long after, looking more defeated than angry. I wasn't proud of how harsh I'd been, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd spent months setting boundaries, and I wasn't about to let him guilt me into crossing them. Lisa's calls kept coming, though they grew more desperate as time went on. One night, she called me in tears, saying she didn't know how much longer she could do this. I thought I was helping Emily and Paul, but it feels like they've checked out. They only show up when it's convenient for them. I'm doing this all by myself. Then stop, I said bluntly. Tell them you're done and give the baby to them full time. They're the parents, not you. I can't just walk away, she cried. What kind of person would that make me? I didn't say what I was thinking, that she was already the kind of person who had thrown her marriage away for a plan that wasn't hers to begin with. Instead, I told her, figure it out, but don't call me looking for answers. This isn't my mess to clean up. She hung up, and I sat there for a while, staring at the phone. A part of me felt bad for her. She'd clearly underestimated how hard this would be, and now she was drowning. But I couldn't let myself get pulled back in. I'd spent too long picking up the pieces of her decisions, and I wasn't going to start again now. For the next few days, things were quiet. Lisa didn't call, and I didn't hear from her mom or Paul either. The silence felt almost unsettling, like the calm before a storm. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. The quiet didn't last long. About a week after Paul's visit, Lisa showed up at my house unannounced. She had the baby strapped to her chest in one of those carriers, her hair disheveled and dark circles under her eyes. I opened the door, immediately bracing myself for whatever drama was about to unfold. "We need to talk," she said, her voice flat but tense. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside and stood in the living room, shifting the baby in the carrier. "This is getting ridiculous. You can't just ignore me forever." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Lisa?" "What do I want?" she repeated, almost laughing. "How about some support? How about you stop pretending like this isn't happening and step up for once?" I stared at her, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I've been clear from the beginning. This isn't my responsibility. You made this choice, not me." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You really think it's that simple, don't you? Just wash your hands of it and walk away." Well, guess what? It's not that simple for me. I'm the one stuck here, trying to keep everything together while Emily and Paul barely lift a finger. "Then take it up with them," I said. "You agreed to this for them, not for me. You can't expect me to clean up their mess." Her face crumpled for a moment, and I thought she might actually cry. But instead, she shifted into anger. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice rising. "Do you even care about anyone but yourself? I'm here, drowning, and you're just watching." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Lisa, I warned you this would happen. I told you from the start I wouldn't support this, and you went through with it anyway. So don't stand here and act like this is my fault." The baby started crying, and Lisa sighed heavily, bouncing slightly to soothe her. "I thought you'd be better than this," she muttered. "I thought you'd at least care enough to help a little." "I cared," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I cared until you made it clear my feelings didn't matter. Now I'm just trying to protect myself and the kids from the mess you created." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat down on the couch, still holding the baby, and put her head in her hands. "I can't do this," she said softly. "I thought I could, but I can't. I'm so tired, and Emily and Paul keep making excuses, and I don't know what to do anymore." For a split second, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered how we got here, how she'd ignored my warnings and dismissed my concerns. "You need to figure it out," I said. "Call Emily. Call Paul. Tell them you need more help. But don't come here expecting me to fix this." She looked up at me, her eyes glassy with tears. "You really hate me, don't you?" "I don't hate you," I said after a long pause. "But I can't be the person you turn to for this. Not anymore." She stayed a little while longer, mostly sitting in silence while the baby fussed. I didn't try to comfort her, and eventually, she left without saying much else. I watched her walk to her car, her shoulders slumped, and felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I didn't regret standing my ground, but it didn't feel good either. The next few days were tense. Lisa didn't call, and I didn't hear from her family, but I could tell something was brewing. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed with a message from her mom. It was long and dramatic, accusing me of being heartless and abandoning Lisa when she needed me most. "You vowed to support her in sickness and in health," she wrote. This is when she needs you the most, and you've turned your back on her. What kind of man does that? I didn't even bother replying. I'd heard it all before, and nothing I said would change her mind. But the message stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Was I really the bad guy in all of this? Had I failed Lisa when she needed me most? I didn't think so, but the doubt lingered like a shadow. Then Paul called again. Lisa's struggling, he said, as if I didn't already know. She's at her breaking point, and I'm trying to help, but it's hard with everything going on. Can't you just, I don't know, give her a little support? For old time's sake? For old time's sake? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Paul, you and Emily created this situation. Lisa agreed to it. I didn't. I'm not swooping in to save her because you can't handle your responsibilities. It's not that simple, Paul said, his tone defensive. We're doing the best we can. Then do better, I said, because I'm not doing this. He hung up after that, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling more drained than ever. No matter how many times I drew the line, they kept trying to push past it. It was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't give in. Not now. Not ever. The next time Lisa showed up at my house, it wasn't to ask for help. She came to see the kids, and for once, she didn't bring the baby with her. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days, but she didn't say much. After the kids went to bed, she lingered in the living room, staring at her hands. I think I made a mistake, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to say, you think? But another part of me just felt sad. Sad for her. Sad for what we'd lost. Sad for everything this situation had done to our family. I don't know how to fix this, she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. You can't, I said softly. You just have to live with it. We all do. She nodded slowly, wiped her eyes, and stood up to leave. I'm sorry, she said before walking out the door. I didn't reply. I just sat there in the quiet, trying to figure out if I felt any better. After Lisa's quiet apology and her departure that night, things seemed to finally settle down. She stopped showing up unannounced, stopped calling me late at night to vent or demand help, and even her family seemed to back off for a while. It wasn't peace, not entirely, but it was as close as I'd gotten in months, and I tried to make the most of it. The kids, of course, were still adjusting. They asked about their mom often, especially my youngest, who didn't understand why everything felt so different. Why isn't Mommy here when I go to bed? They'd ask, their small voice filled with confusion. I do my best to explain without putting too much weight on their shoulders. Mom's staying at Grandma's for a while, I'd say, but she still loves you, and you'll see her soon. It seemed to satisfy them most of the time, though I could tell they missed her. Lisa's visits became more routine, which helped a little. She'd come by to see the kids, spend a few hours with them, and then leave. She looked more tired every time I saw her, and I couldn't help but notice how much the situation was wearing her down. She rarely brought the baby with her anymore, and when I asked why, she shrugged. It's just easier this way, she said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't press her. Whatever was going on with her and Emily and Paul, it wasn't my business anymore. Still, I couldn't help but overhear things when she talked to the kids. One day, she was helping them with a puzzle at the dining table, and I caught her saying, "It's been really hard, but I'm trying my best." Sometimes grown-ups make choices they think are right, but it doesn't always turn out the way they hoped. She didn't say it directly, but I knew she was talking about the surrogacy, about everything that had happened since. I stayed in the kitchen, listening but not interrupting. I wasn't sure if she was trying to explain herself to the kids or to me. Then came the letter from her lawyer. It was about spousal support again. Despite all the evidence we presented in court, despite her clear agreement to carry the baby for Emily and Paul, Lisa's legal team was still pushing the narrative that I owed her something. She gave up her stability to help her family, the letter said. Her financial situation is precarious, and she deserves support from her spouse. My lawyer, thankfully, was prepared. We had emails, texts, and voicemails proving that I had been against the surrogacy from the start, and that I'd made my boundaries clear. Still, it was infuriating to deal with. Every time I thought I was done with the legal side of this mess, something else would pop up, dragging me back into the chaos. The next time Lisa came to see the kids, I brought it up. What's with the spousal support filing? I asked, keeping my tone even. She sighed, looking tired and defeated. I didn't want to, she said quietly. But my mom and Emily, they think it's the right thing to do. And what do you think? I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. I'm drowning. Okay? Between the baby, the kids, trying to figure out what my life even looks like now. I don't know what else to do. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Lisa, this isn't about me being heartless or abandoning you. This is about choices. You made yours, and now you have to deal with the consequences. I'm not your safety net anymore. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded and said, I know. After that, the visits became quieter. Lisa seemed to pull back, like she was trying to process everything, and I let her. I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds, and if she needed space to figure things out, I wasn't going to stop her. Then, one evening, she came to pick up the kids for a weekend visit, and something about her seemed different. She looked lighter, almost. She didn't say much, just thanked me for having everything packed and ready, but there was a quietness to her that felt less like defeat and more like acceptance. I didn't ask what had changed, but I noticed she didn't bring up the baby or complain about Emily and Paul. Maybe she was finally figuring out how to separate herself from their expectations. Or maybe she just run out of energy to fight. Whatever it was, I didn't dwell on it. I was too busy trying to rebuild my own life, to focus on the kids and give them the stability they needed. My mom had been an incredible help through all of this, stepping in whenever I needed an extra hand, and even my friends had started to come around more often, checking in and making sure I wasn't drowning under the weight of it all. For the first time in a long time, I started to feel like things were falling into place. But even with things settling down, there were still moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if I could have handled things differently. Could I have been more understanding? Could I have tried harder to make it work? The guilt didn't linger long, though. Every time it crept in, I reminded myself that Lisa had made her choices, and I'd made mine. I'd done what I needed to do to protect myself and the kids, and that was what mattered most. The divorce proceedings were nearing their end, and while the process had been long and draining, I felt ready to move forward. Lisa and I were never going to be what we once were. But maybe, just maybe, we could figure out how to be better for the kids. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing about this had been easy. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally on solid ground. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later, bringing a strange mix of relief and finality. There wasn't any big courtroom drama or shocking twists, just paperwork and signatures that marked the official end of a life I once thought would last forever. When I got the final decree in the mail, I stared at it for a long time, not sure how I felt. Part of me was glad it was over, that I could finally start moving forward without Lisa's choices hanging over me. But another part of me couldn't ignore the weight of everything we'd lost along the way. Lisa and I didn't have a big conversation about it. We didn't need to. By the time the divorce was official, we'd both said everything there was to say. Our communication was almost entirely about the kids now, school schedules, doctor's appointments, custody handoffs. It was cordial but distant, which was probably for the best. The kids were adjusting, though it was clear the whole situation still weighed on them. My oldest asked me one night, "Do you and Mom not love each other anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I did my best to answer honestly. "We'll always care about each other," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But sometimes grown-ups realize they're better off living apart. It doesn't mean we don't love you or want what's best for you." They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for, and no matter how much I tried to shield them from the fallout, they felt it. I made a promise to myself that I'd do whatever it took to give them stability, even if that meant working twice as hard to keep things running smoothly. As for Lisa, she seemed to settle into her new reality, though it wasn't without its struggles. During one of her visits with the kids, she admitted she'd moved back in with Emily and Paul temporarily. "It's not ideal," she said, her tone bitter, "but I didn't have a choice. They needed help with the baby, and I couldn't handle everything on my own." I didn't say much in response. What was there to say? She'd chosen this path, and now she was living with the consequences. But there was something about the way she said it, the exhaustion in her voice, that stuck with me. For all her mistakes, for all the ways she'd hurt me and the kids, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. She'd sacrificed so much for Emily and Paul, and from what I could see, they hadn't exactly held up their end of the bargain. Over time, Lisa stopped talking about the baby altogether. It was like she'd realized that every mention of it just reopened old wounds, and neither of us had the energy for another fight. Instead, our conversations focused on logistics, who was picking up the kids from school, what time she'd be dropping them off after her weekends with them, and whether or not they needed new shoes or supplies for a class project. It wasn't friendly, exactly, but it was functional, and that was enough. I started to find a rhythm in my new life. The house felt quieter without Lisa's constant presence, but it also felt lighter. There was no more tension hanging in the air, no more arguments or guilt trips or impossible requests. It was just me and the kids, figuring things out day by day. My mom continued to be a huge help, coming over a couple of times a week to cook dinner or watch the kids so I could have a little time to myself. She'd always been my rock, but during this whole mess, I realized just how much I relied on her. One evening, after a particularly hectic day, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There were pictures from vacations, birthdays, and lazy Sunday mornings, moments that felt like they belonged to a completely different life. I stopped on a picture of Lisa and me from our anniversary a few years ago. We were smiling, her head resting on my shoulder, and for a second, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Sadness? Nostalgia? Maybe all three. But then I thought about everything that had happened since that picture was taken. The lies, the betrayal, the way she dismissed my feelings and thrown our marriage aside for something she hadn't even fully thought through. Whatever love I'd once had for her had been replaced by something else. An emptiness, maybe, or just a quiet acceptance that we were better apart. The next few months were a blur of routines and small milestones. The kids started to settle into the new normal, and while there were still questions and moments of sadness, they seemed to be doing okay. They were resilient, and seeing them smile or laugh reminded me why I'd made the choices I had. I wasn't perfect, but I was doing my best to give them a stable, happy life. One day, during a custody exchange, Lisa surprised me. She looked healthier, more rested than she had in months. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly, her hand resting on the car door, "for being patient, for not making this harder than it needed to be." I didn't know how to respond at first. "I wasn't trying to be patient," I said eventually. "I was just trying to protect the kids." She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Well, thank you anyway." I watched her drive away, feeling a strange sense of closure. Things between us would never be perfect, but they didn't need to be. We'd both made mistakes, and we'd both paid the price. Now it was time to move on.